Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for all my continued followers, I want to say thank you. And this is an opinion-based video channel where I try to open your eyes and ears up to some of the travails and tribulations that take place throughout our cities, our states, our country, and sometimes around the world. And I got another story for you coming straight out of President Donald Trump's administration and his cuts. It seems like two of the bigger issues that Trump has focused on has been the immigration issue with ICE and removing folks by any means necessary out of the country and people of color. And then secondarily, it seems like Trump is going after all of the DEI issues that are taking place definitely in our government and our major universities, and even in corporate America. But he is really hitting the universities hard. I don't know if you remember that there's been a big issue with Harvard University where President Trump was trying to rescind or hold back $3 to $5 billion worth of DEI funding to Harvard. And what does that affect if they can't get that $3 to $5 billion? We're talking about research funding for medicine, for science, for law, when you're talking about people working on their PhDs in biochemistry and biology, sociology, things of that nature. And you have to remember that DEI came into effect during the Obama administration around 2010. So affirmative action got removed or abolished. And you have to remember that the majority of the recipients of affirmative action were white women. Then when DEI came in, it expanded the scope to include LGBTQ folks, Indians from India, Asian people from China, Japan, etc., which will all be considered people of color. So he's going after immigration with people of color, and he's going after DEI, which affects all folks of color and including the LGBTQ. And now, and it seems as if the Supreme Court has been backing him in many of these issues. So it's not just Donald Trump, but it's also the Supreme Court. Because now the Supreme Court lets the Trump administration cut $783 million of research funding in an anti-DEI push and campaign. So let's see what's going on here. As a result of the Supreme Court, the Trump administration can slash hundreds of millions of dollars worth of research funding in its push to cut federal diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. The Supreme Court decided. So we're talking about major universities like Stanford, Harvard, all the Ivy League schools, Washington University here in St. Louis, University of Chicago in Chicago, which all of these, Duke University, we're talking about all of these universities that are on the precipice of our national research and even the NIH, the National Institute of Health. Where the funding needs to be there for these folks that have expertise in research and advancing us medically, technologically, etc. Now that funding is in a major situation where it may be removed. So the Supreme Court, the split, lifted a judge's order blocking the $783 million worth of cuts made by the National Institutes of Health to align with Republican President Donald Trump's priorities. The Supreme Court, split 5-4 on the decision. Chief Justice John Roberts was among those who wouldn't have allowed the cuts. He would not have allowed the cuts, along with the court's 3 liberals. The High Court did keep the Trump administration's anti-DEI directive blocked for future funding with a key vote from Justice Amy Coney Barrett, however. The decision marks the latest Supreme Court win for Trump and allows the administration to forge ahead with canceling hundreds of grants while the lawsuit continues to unfold. So this is going to affect graduate students, professors who have tenure at these universities. They need this money to continue their research. It says the plaintiffs say the decision is a significant setback for public health. So you're talking about medical research, you're talking about science research, and that the holding back of the funding for these national research projects will trickle down and affect human beings. So it says the plaintiff's decision says the decision is a significant setback for public health, but keeping the directive blocked means the administration cannot use it to cut more studies. The Justice Department, meanwhile, has said funding decisions should not be subject to judicial second guessing, and efforts to promote policies referred to as DEI can conceal insidious racial discrimination. So the Trump administration is saying that DEI, let alone back in the day, people talked about affirmative action as reverse discrimination against whites. Mind you, affirmative action, the number one benefactor of affirmative action were white females. But the Trump administration is saying this DEI push is withholding or holding back white Americans from getting an effort at these universities or getting into these universities, and that these universities are lowering their standards based on DEI. The lawsuit addresses only part of the estimated $12 billion of NIH research projects that have been cut, $12 billion. But in its emergency appeal, the Trump administration also took aim at nearly 24 other times judges have stood in the way of its funding cuts. Solicitor General D. John Sawyer said judges shouldn't be considering those cases under an earlier Supreme Court decision that cleared the way for teacher training program cuts that the administration also linked to DEI. He says that they should go to federal claims court instead. 5 conservative justices agreed, and Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote a short opinion in which he criticized the lower court judges for not adhering to earlier higher court orders. All these interventions should have been unnecessary. Said Gorsuch in what he wrote. The plaintiffs, 16 Democrat state attorney generals, and public health advocacy groups had unsuccessfully argued that research grants are fundamentally different from the teacher training contracts and couldn't be sent to the claims court. They said that defunding studies midway through halts its research, ruins data already collected, and ultimately harms the country's potential for scientific breakthroughs by disrupting scientists' work in the middle of their careers. So this can trickle down to human beings, to the everyday person, to patients. They need this money for medical research for sure, and scientific research. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote a lengthy dissent in which she criticized both the outcome and her colleagues' willingness to continue allowing the administration to use the court's emergency appeals process. This is Calvin Ball jurisprudence with a twist. Calvin Ball has only one rule. There are no fixed rules. We seem to have 2. That one and this administration always wins, she wrote, referring to the fictional game in the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes. In June, U.S. District Court Judge William Young in Massachusetts had ruled that the cancellations were arbitrary and discriminatory. I've never seen government racial discrimination like this. U.S. District Judge William Young said, an appointee of the Republican. Young was an appointee of Republican President Ronald Reagan. And he said at the hearing that he later added that this administration has no shame. An appeals court had left Young's ruling in place. And now it is shocking that the Supreme Court has sided with President Trump on removing almost $800 million worth of DEI grants that were going to these major universities like Harvard, Ivy League institutions, high think tanking institutions, Stanford, University of Chicago, WashU, etc., where you do have a high preponderance of Indians from India, Asians from China, Japan, etc. And it seems that, that Trump is calling this reverse discrimination, but it seems like President Donald Trump is definitely going after people of color in some of these legal rulings when it pertains to the ICE and the immigration issue. And now you're seeing that he's trying to remove billions of dollars from some of our greatest think tank institutions that is going to put a harbinger on our medical research, our scientific research for advancing us as human beings. And it seems like President Trump is a bit heartless when it comes to taking care of the overall melting pot of America. This does not look like a good sign. I am surprised that the Supreme Court ruled with President Trump's administration in their favor. And removing those kinds of grants, we're talking about billions of dollars, will have a very big deleterious effect on research in the medical community, in the scientific community, in our psychology, our sociology, our legal community, which does research, all based upon trying to remove all the proponents of DEI. I don't think that's a good move on President Donald Trump's and his administration's behalf. This whole movement with MAGA and this lily white perception that white America is being held back as a result of affirmative action and now DEI, I think is a fallacy, and the proponents of affirmative action and DEI should still be in place to a certain degree. Tell me what you think. This has been the Trevor Donald Experience.